in a legal battle. We'll see what happens there. But local communities are very concerned about this becoming a state issue. Why? I talked to the local sheriff. He says his deputies are not trained in immigration law. And he says his jails don't have room to jail all of the people that you see behind me.
So
we have no training of immigration laws, Plus, where are we going to put them? We don't have the space in my jail. We have to take them somewhere else.
Now, Aaron, this SB 4 law does not have monies for local governments for police training. That's one concern. Now, back to the lawsuit. Governor Greg Abbott issuing a statement saying that this law is constitutional and that he plans to fight it all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court.
Court's going to be busy. So why are all the people behind you outside, Rosa? I mean, obviously it looks very improvised in terms of the red netting or the orange netting, right, that they have up to sort of even create lines.
And the easy answer is that Border Patrol is overwhelmed. Right now, there's about 23,000 migrants in Border Patrol custody. And Aaron, that doesn't include all the migrants that you see behind me. The holding capacity for Border Patrol is actually 10,000. So think about that. There's already 23,000 people in custody. So why this backup and this bottleneck? There's a few reasons. Of course, there's flow, capacity, and also the Biden administration is trying to impose legal consequences to illegal entry. Aaron.
Rosa, thank you very much. In Eagle Pass tonight. And next, Iceland. We're going to take you live there. The major eruption is still taking place, and our Fred Pleiken is right near that volcano. He's next.
I'm Livy Dunn, All-American gymnast and Viore athlete. When you travel and train as much as I do, you find happiness
never even happens, and you're
men
immigration laws, Plus, where are we going to put them? We don't have
issue. Why? I talked to the Texas right now. This is the
.com online auctions since
crowd of migrants behind you as you have been there these past. And these numbers, though, no matter how you
now and see how much you can save.
Join Poppy and Phil on CNN This Morning, tomorrow at 6 Eastern.
Tonight, immigration showdown. Texas Governor Greg Abbott now being sued over his new law giving local police the power to arrest migrants and send them to Mexico. The federal lawsuit filed as there's a major surge at the U.S. southern border. CNN learning tonight that nearly 13,000 migrants, 13,000 have been apprehended in the past 24 hours. That's an 80% increase from last week. And these numbers, though, no matter how you look at it, relatively or absolutely are enormous. Rosa Flores is out front in Eagle Pass, Texas. And Rosa, you are there. There is a large crowd of migrants behind you as you have been there these past few hours. What is happening now?
Well, thousands of migrants are waiting to be transported for immigration processing. But let me set the tone here, Aaron, because really what is happening in Eagle Pass, Texas right now, this is the epicenter of the broken federal immigration system colliding with a state, the state of Texas, wanting to take matters into its own hands. Let me show you what I'm talking about. Look over my shoulder and you'll see that there are thousands of migrants here. I can see women, children, men. And right now, what you're looking at is a federal issue. The federal government has to process these migrants, hold these migrants. But Governor Greg Abbott has just signed SB 4. This creates a new crime for illegal entry into the state of Texas. And what you're looking at could become a state issue. Now, this law is expected to go into effect in March. But as you mentioned, Aaron, it is already caught in a legal battle. We'll see what happens there. But local communities are very concerned about this becoming a state issue. Why? I talked to the local sheriff. He says his deputies are not trained in immigration law. And he says his jails don't have room to jail all of the people that you see behind me.
So
we have no training of immigration laws, Plus, where are we going to put them? We don't have the space in my jail. We have to take them somewhere else.
or on the sand movement and
helping those people. Who helps the California State University system with nearly 500,000 students and 23 campuses to move services like financial aid and online classes to the cloud? Who helps students graduate to new dreams? The answer is Unisys, our cloud and application solutions, helping the next generation, one breakthrough after another.
You're looking at live pictures of the volcanic eruption in Iceland. At one point, lava was spewing at a rate would fill an Olympic pool in 20 seconds, according to Live Science. Well, Fred Pleiken is there. He is out front in Grindavik, Iceland, which was less than a mile from the eruption.
The Arctic night illuminated as the Earth breaks apart. From the fissure bursts its molten core. Weeks of earthquakes led to this display of our planet's fire and force.
Following a volcanic eruption, there's always high levels of toxic gases. The main concern in Iceland now is the distribution of this with the wind.
It's never possible to say exactly when or if a volcano like this one near the town of Grindavik will erupt. Officials took no chances, though, evacuating the population after weeks of tremors. Thousands of shakes were felt in November, and all knew what they could bring. Thankfully, none were in Grindavik town when the volcano, around 2 miles away, finally did erupt. This crack in the surface of our world, close to 4 kilometers or more than 2 miles long, spewing lava.
This is as close as the authorities are going to let us to the volcanic eruption in the southwest of Iceland. It's a so-called fissure eruption. That means an eruption along a crack that can be several miles long rather than on a volcanic cone. Now, one of the good things about these eruptions is that actually usually they don't spew ash into the atmosphere very high, which can and has in the past disrupt air travel internationally. Of course, in a place like Iceland, that can have massive effect.
Previous eruptions in Iceland have lasted weeks or even months.
Unfortunately for the inhabitants of Grindavik, it's impossible to say how long this will last.
In the town of Grindavik, the earthquake damage is clear. The lava may follow.
If this activity goes on, then the big question is, will Grindavik be inhabitable in the long run?
Whether people can ever move back here depends on a new set of geological circumstances being created right now.
And those geological circumstances, Aaron, is one of the things that many Icelanders are talking about right now. They say that this area of Iceland was dormant for about 800 years. But now in the past 2 years, you've had 4 volcanic eruptions here, none of them nearly the size of the one that's going on right now. And again, the authorities believe that that volcanic eruption could continue for weeks, possibly even for months, Aaron.
Wow, and an incredible thing that you get to witness, Fred. Thank you so much. And thanks so much to all of you for being with us. AC 360 starts now.
The 14th Amendment of the Constitution says insurrectionists cannot hold, quote, any office, civil or military, under the United States. And tonight, in a ruling as stunning as it is unprecedented, Colorado Supreme Court said that Donald J. Trump, 45th President of the United States, is an insurrectionist and therefore should be disqualified from being president. Good evening. I'm Pamela Brown here in for Anderson tonight, and we begin with not just the ruling, which is historic, but what happens when it almost certainly reaches the U.S. Supreme Court, which could be seismic. Starting us off tonight, CNN Chief Legal Affairs Correspondent Paula Reed. Paula, tell us more about this really surprising ruling.
Surprising, remarkable, Pamela. And the judges here, they acknowledge that at the top of their opinion. They talk about the weight and the magnitude of the issue that they're deciding here. I mean, this is the biggest court decision to impact a national election since Bush v. Gore. And even though this only impacts Colorado, the implications could be national, because here we're talking about the 14th Amendment of the United States Constitution. And there's a section of that amendment that bars U.S. officials who engage in an insurrection from holding public office. Now, in this case in Colorado was at the lower court level. There was a trial. They found that Trump did engage in an insurrection, but they said he shouldn't be disqualified from the ballot because the judge said that that section of the Constitution didn't specifically mention presidents. But here, the state Supreme Court reversing that, saying he should be disqualified from the ballot, and even any votes that are written in for him shouldn't be counted.
All right, so the Colorado Supreme Court ruling tonight that Trump shouldn't be on the primary ballot as a result of what you just laid out, but he still will likely be on the primary ballot in Colorado. Why is that? Help us understand that.
Exactly. Welcome to civil procedure. So in their opinion, they say, look, we're going to put a stay on this. So they're going to put their decision on pause until January 4th, 2024. And that date is significant because it's the day before the state certifies its primary ballot. And they say if he appeals to the Supreme Court, which the former president has already signaled he intends to do, the whole decision stays on hold until the high court weighs in one way or another. So that means that, yes, we do expect that he will still be on the primary ballot. And this larger question could impact the general election in November, depending on what the Supreme Court decides to do or not do.
Wow. And just talk about the course load for the Supreme Court as it relates to this upcoming election. It's really unbelievable. You sort of touched on the one hurdle, and that is whether Section 3 of the 14th Amendment applies to the president. But if you would lay out the different legal hurdles the Colorado Supreme Court had to overcome to reach this decision that the Supreme Court would be looking at, assuming Trump appeals as expected.
Yeah, so we expect that he will appeal. And we're already seeing, at least in the court of public opinion, he's trying to frame this as political persecution. But one of the things that he's pointing to is that this is an all Democrat Supreme Court. Now, his lawyers have argued that a state court should not even have the authority, that they do not have the authority to take a candidate who has been selected by his party off the ballot. Now, they're also, of course, going to argue sort of esoteric issues about, the post-Civil War revision to the 14th Amendment, the specific section that we're talking about. They're going to emphasize that presidents aren't mentioned there. And mostly, though, I think they're going to insist that a state court, particularly one where the Supreme Court is stacked with the opposition party, should not have this power. So it'll be interesting to see if the Supreme Court takes this up. But the former president's lawyers, they do have a lot of arguments. In fact, they also have 3 judges here dissenting, laying out why they think the majority is wrong. So that could help their case. It'll be, again, a fascinating case, just another way the Supreme Court looms so large over the 2024 election.
Yeah, they have the 3 dissenting judges in this case, and they had 3 states that didn't agree with this decision that also looked at it. So, Paula Reed, thank you so much. I know you're continuing to go through this ruling, so we're going to come back to you in just a bit with any new information. But I want to get reaction now from Colorado's top election official, Secretary of State Jenna Griswold, who, if this ruling stands, will be in charge of enforcing it. Madam Secretary, you just heard Paula lay out some of the questions as it pertains to this ruling and your state. What does this ruling mean for the former president in the state of Colorado tonight?
Well, it's definitely a big case. The fact of the matter is the Colorado Supreme Court has determined that Donald Trump did engage in insurrection and that his actions have disqualified him from being president. I just think the gravity of that in itself is just remarkable. We've never had a president incite an insurrection and then try to run for the presidency again. We'll see if the United States Supreme Court weighs in, and I, of course, will follow whatever court order or decision is in place by the time that we certify the ballot.
The dissent questioned whether Colorado state law allows the disqualification of a presidential candidate based on the insurrection ban. Do you think this is allowed under state law?
My job as Secretary of State is to make sure that only qualified candidates appear on our ballot. We routinely do that with all types of candidates. And just like I wouldn't allow Arnold Schwarzenegger on the presidential primary ballot because he is disqualified for not being a natural born citizen, a candidate who is disqualified under Section 3 of the 14th Amendment similarly would be barred. So I do disagree with the dissent. But ultimately, it is up to the court systems. And right now, the highest case that we have says that Donald Trump is disqualified because he disqualified himself when he tried to steal the presidency from the American people.
So to be clear, you disagree with the dissent and you believe he is disqualified and therefore should not be on the state ballot. You agree with the majority in this opinion?
No, that's not what I said.
Okay.
I, of course, will follow whatever court decision is in place. What I disagree with is that it is impossible or not permissible under Colorado law to disqualify a candidate from the presidential primary. It is routine for the Secretary of State's office to check on qualifications. And when there are big questions about qualifications, there's a mechanism under Colorado state law that allows voters to take a case to a court. That's exactly what we are seeing play out. And I think it's noteworthy to say the petitioners who filed this case were actually 6 Republican and unaffiliated Colorado voters. who believe that Donald Trump is disqualified.
But what do you think as the Secretary of State? Do you think he should be disqualified, or do you think he should be qualified?
My job is to follow the law and uphold the US Constitution. And this is a novel situation. I believe that Donald Trump incited the insurrection and that it's up to a court to determine whether that incitement disqualifies him from further holding office under the Constitution. This is exactly how Colorado law is set up. Everyday voters can file a lawsuit to have a court weigh in. This isn't such a clear-cut case in that we don't have a lot of case law. It's unprecedented. And it's unprecedented by its nature in itself. We usually do not have presidents try to steal elections. And usually that we don't need to rely on Section 3 of the 14th Amendment to clear up eligibility of presidential candidates.
Okay, thank you for clarifying your position on this, Jenna Griswold. We appreciate it. Well, the former president is in Iowa, his fourth visit there in recent weeks, speaking tonight in the city of Waterloo. CNN's Jeff Zeleny is there as well, joins us. So has the former president reacted to tonight's monumental decision by the Colorado Supreme Court, Jeff?
Well, Pamela, surprisingly, he is not. He's been speaking for nearly an hour here in Waterloo, talking about the Iowa caucuses that are coming up in just 27 days, talking about some of his rivals, particularly Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, but he has not talked at all about that monumental Colorado Supreme Court ruling. His campaign has. His campaign swiftly reacted in a statement urging the Supreme Court to take this case up, and they believe they will be vindicated. The former president has talked about the Supreme Court. He's taken credit for appointing 3 members of the Supreme Court, but he has not yet mentioned this Colorado case. But a raft of Republicans have, from Speaker Johnson to other members of Congress, and his campaign has been sending those out in rapid fire. But he has not spoken about it. Largely, this is a familiar stump speech that he's been giving at virtually every stop. He's been urging Iowans to come out and support him. He said he cannot take his victory for granted. He needs to, quote, put his victory to bed here. But Pamela has not talked about this Colorado case at all. It's been notable. He's been reading a lot of it off his teleprompter. So unclear if this was a plan to not mention it or if he simply hasn't gotten to it yet. Again, he's been speaking just about an hour here in Waterloo.
Yeah, I know you'll be listening if he does respond to this. Was there any reaction from the crowd? I'm curious that you heard as the news began to spread about this ruling. What have you been hearing there on the ground about this?
Well, look, as the crowd was waiting for him to arrive, Pamela, as you know well, it takes hours for him to arrive, and the crowd gathers early. And of course, they got this news on their phones. I was talking to a couple of his supporters, quite frankly, some confusion about what exactly this rule is. Quite frankly, the criminal cases, the judicial cases against him have been mounting up. So the people who did follow this, simply said it was unfair. One more example of what they view as the Justice Department, the justice system being against this former president. We've seen time and time again, his supporters have rallied to his defense on everything. So certainly this would be one of those examples. And Pamela, his campaign is trying to raise money off this tonight, sending out a fundraising appeal just a short time ago, asking supporters to send in small dollar contributions. So look, we can certainly expect this is going to be a rallying cry, but certainly a very serious matter here about having this name on the ballot in Colorado or perhaps elsewhere.
Yeah, Pamela. It could have nationwide implications. Jeff Zeleny, thank you so much. So to help put this in perspective, legally and politically, I'm joined here by CNN senior political analyst Gloria Borger, also Joe Walsh, former Illinois Republican congressman and host of the White Flag podcast, and CNN legal analyst Carrie Cordero. With us as well, law professor and former federal prosecutor Jessica Roth, and Nancy Gertner, retired federal judge and currently Harvard University senior law lecturer. Carrie, I want to start with you. It is hard to overstate how big of a deal this is. What is your reaction to this unprecedented ruling?
Well, the Colorado Supreme Court really understands, and it communicated in its opinion, the novelty of what it's done here and the historical significance of what it's done here, saying, quote, "We travel in uncharted territory." And this case presents several issues of first impression. So the court really just understands this important moment, the decision that it's made. Not to say that this will be the ultimate decision of the U.S. Supreme Court, where this case is absolutely headed. I think it's interesting that this court made the decision both on the fact of law finding that the former president was an officer. That is a not necessarily the outcome that we would think the court would absolutely obtain. I mean, it's a questionable decision on that point. And then also that the former president engaged in the insurrection itself, and even though he hasn't been charged. So two really significant findings of law by this Colorado Supreme Court.
Right. And the district court judge in this case ruled that, yes, he did incite insurrection, but that Section 3 of the 14th Amendment doesn't apply to the presidency. The Colorado Supreme Court said, actually, yes, it does, even though it doesn't explicitly say presidency under Section 3. So, Carrie, we mentioned the Trump campaign says it will, quote, swiftly file an appeal of the decision tonight. If you would just explain how that appeal process will work with the Supreme Court and what the stay that's involved in this means for Trump being on the primary ballot in Colorado. It could be a little bit confusing.
Right. Well, so the stay means that the Colorado can proceed now until the Supreme Court takes it up. And I think, you know, again, this being such an unusual, unprecedented case, we will have to see how quickly the Supreme Court moves, because they understand that there is an election. There is this date for the primary in Colorado. And so they are going to have to take all of that into consideration. Oftentimes, the Supreme Court has as much time as it wants to be able to make its decisions in a long and deliberate process. But in this case, they simply don't have that time. And yet they are going to have to be dealing with an issue of absolute historical significance, particularly on that issue of whether or not a president in this Section 3 of the 14th Amendment is an officer of the United States. The Colorado Supreme Court says that the language itself in the Constitution is so clear, but the fact that they are saying it's absolutely clear, in fact, they say it's so evident that he was in office, that is going to, we'll really have to see how the Supreme Court comes out on that.
Yeah, and my understanding as well is that if he appeals by January 4th, then this decision is stayed and he will still appear on the primary ballot in Colorado. It's really a question of the general election ballot. Judge Gertner, I want to go to you because as much as tonight's ruling is about Colorado, this obviously now becomes a nationwide issue, right? Whether you're in Colorado or not, because depending on how the Supreme Court rules on this decision, whether it takes it up, every other state could be impacted, correct?
Right. Every other state could be impacted, and there have been inconsistent rulings around the country, which is usually the reason why the Supreme Court would take a case like this, either because there's inconsistent rulings or because it's a matter of national importance. So you're right that it only applies in Colorado now, and the other challenges only in the states that they're in. But the Supreme Court, it certainly could be precedent for disqualification anywhere else in the country. The notion that this was a Democratic only a Supreme Court, true, there were only Democratic appointees, but the court split 4-3, and the position of the majority has been supported by conservative scholars all across the country. So it'll be interesting to see where it goes from here.
Right. And my understanding is they were all appointed by Democratic governors, but also 6 of the 7 of them are in for re-election to maintain their seat. But of course, that's going to be a big talking point for Trump and his campaign, as it already is. We're going to talk about the politics of this in just a second. But Jessica, I want to go to you to read part of the ruling. Quote, "We conclude that the foregoing evidence, the great bulk of which was undisputed at trial, established that President Trump engaged in insurrection. President Trump's direct and express efforts over several months, exhorting his supporters to march to the Capitol to prevent what he falsely characterized as an alleged fraud on the people of this country, were indisputably overt and voluntary," end quote. What does it say to you that the Colorado Supreme Court reached this conclusion after a handful of other states did not?
This was a very, very thorough ruling, not only on the legal question presented, which we've been talking about thus far, and whether the president is an officer of the United States, but on the factual question of whether he engaged in insurrection. This court opinion was very lengthy. It got into the facts that were developed in the district court record and made very strong findings that Trump incited the rebellion inside of the insurrection at the Capitol, that he sowed lies about the election having been stolen, and then made his statements and his speech at the Ellipse with the understanding that it would be understood by some of his supporters as a call to violence. Those are among the findings that are included in this opinion by the Colorado Supreme Court, echoing the findings of the district court opinion. So these are really sort of astonishing findings, and these are not the kinds of findings that can be overturned by the United States Supreme Court. They could disagree with the legal question of whether the president is an officer of the United States. They might even disagree with the legal question of what constitutes insurrection. But on the factual questions of what Trump did and what his intent was, that's really not something that the United States Supreme Court is going to be in a position to overturn. So those findings, in a sense, will stand, and they're really damning.
Yeah, they certainly are damning. Trump, for his part, is vowing to appeal this ruling. Gloria, on that note, we just went to Jeff Zeleny before, and unless something changed between then and now, Trump had not actually addressed this, which I personally find a little bit surprising because of the fact that, you know, this could potentially pour more jet fuel onto the arguments that he has been making on the campaign trail, right?
Oh, sure. And as Jeff pointed out, there's already a fundraising email out on this. Look, Pamela, I think this throws a grenade into the presidential election. Donald Trump can use this right now to his advantage to make the point that the system is rigged against him, that these are a bunch of judges who don't want him to win election, and this could supercharge his base. And I'm surprised he didn't talk about it tonight. Maybe it's because the ruling came out so close to his speech. But I also think this is going to sort of confuse the public, because you have the pending case on the insurrection with the special counsel, Jack Smith. The Supreme Court now has to decide the question of presidential immunity, which is before it, as well as this question of the 14th Amendment. So as much as the court doesn't want to get involved, and as much as I'm sure these judges didn't want to, you know, supercharge the election process, I think they've done that. And the question is, how do the other candidates react to this? That, you know, that remains to be seen. But I think now this gives Trump another very good talking point.
Yeah, and to pick up on what you just raised, to bring you in, Joe, how do you think this affects Trump's opponents?
Everything that Gloria just said and then some. Look, I think a lot of us always thought Trump was probably going to be the nominee. This is it. Pamela, it freezes them. You're DeSantis, you're Nikki Haley. What are you going to say? You're going to have to echo what Trump's going to say eventually. They're keeping me off the ballot. This is the deep state. This is, to the average Republican there in Waterloo tonight, it's all confusing, but it's all part of the same argument that Trump's been making, which is politically, they don't want me to run again. That's really, really powerful. And I'd argue that's really powerful with voters beyond just his hardcore base. And DeSantis and Nikki Haley have to second that.
Right. And it feeds into this narrative he's been pushing more aggressively recently, saying, I'm not the threat to democracy. It's really the other side. They're trying to take away your will as a voter, right? I mean, it will not be surprising if he uses that to try to push that narrative along, even though it's all separate. This is a Colorado Supreme Court. There's federal cases, there's state cases. He's trying to lump them all in together. Judge Gertner, ultimately, though, you look at the Supreme Court, and Gloria touched on this, it's just really incredible. If we take a step back and look at all of these weighty Trump-related decisions they're poised to make before the election in November of next year.
This is Bush v. Gore on steroids. They have to make decisions as to what they're going to take. There's a lurking question, as we all know, which is whether Justice Thomas participates in these, these are cases that are dealing more directly with the January 6th insurrection. Will he recuse himself, or will there be motions to recuse him because Ginny Thomas, his wife, was at the Ellipse. She didn't go to the Capitol, but she was there. And there were text messages that she sent, which were about supporting the false elector scheme and the challenges to the election. Frankly, personally, in any other situation, a judge would recuse himself. In this situation, the court will say, or they may say that, if he recuses himself, the court will be split 8, it's 4-4, only 8 judges. It's an interesting question whether someone who should be disqualified should be the tiebreaker, but that's where we are.
Well, and we know he didn't disqualify himself when it came to a January 6th related question with the January 6th committee, but you're right, that's interesting. There are so many different interesting legal and political threads here. We're going to stay on top of all of it. Thank you all for your analysis and perspective on this monumental story tonight. And up next, a leading conservative legal scholar and early advocate for keeping Trump off the ballot on 14th Amendment grounds. Retired appeals court judge J. Michael Ludig joins us. And then later, a live report from Iceland, where a volcano just made winter there that much harder. We'll be right back.
Realtor.com's Real View maps show you precise wildfire, flood, and noise ratings on every home listing.
Don't all apps do that?
Not really. Trust the ¡1 app real estate professionals trust. Download the Realtor.com app today.
Type 2 diabetes? Discover the Ozempic Trizone. Ozempic! I got the power of 3. I lowered my A1C, CV risk, and lost some weight.
In studies, the majority of people reached an A1C under 7 and maintained it.
I'm under 7.
Ozempic lowers the risk of major cardiovascular events such as stroke, heart attack, or death in adults also with known heart disease.
I'm lowering my risk.
Adults lost up to 14 pounds.
I lost some weight.
Ozempic isn't for people with type 1 diabetes. Don't share needles or pens or reuse needles. Don't take Ozempic if you or your family ever had medullary thyroid cancer or have multiple endocrine neoplasia syndrome type 2 or if allergic to it. Stop Ozempic and get medical help right away if you get a lump or swelling in your neck, severe stomach pain, or an allergic reaction. Serious side effects may include pancreatitis. Gallbladder problems may occur. Tell your provider about vision problems or changes. Taking Ozempic with a sulfonylurea or insulin may increase low blood sugar risk. Side effects like nausea, vomiting, and diarrhea may lead to dehydration, which may worsen kidney problems. Living with type 2 diabetes?
Ask about the power of 3 with Ozempic.
This holiday season, instead of ho ho ho, it's time to go go go, hands-free with the hit of the holidays, hands-free Skechers slip-ins. You just step in and they're on. No bending down, no touching your shoes. Hands-free Skechers slip-ins are the perfect gift for everybody. 'Tis the season to go hands-free.
The Serrano name has always been something we're proud of. It's why we show it off on our lowriders and why we wear our name on our chains. We come from people we can be proud of. From SoCal to our family in Texas to back home in Jalisco. Seeing all the places I come from, I know if it's a Serrano, it's something to be proud of. I take it all with me and I always will.
Give the gift of family heritage with Ancestry.
Take a moment to pause and ask, why did you get vaccinated against pneumococcal pneumonia?
I help others, but I need to help protect myself.
Honestly, I couldn't afford to get sick.
I want to be there for this one. I can't if I'm sick.
Pneumococcal pneumonia is a potentially serious bacterial lung disease. You may be at risk if you're 19 to 64 with certain chronic conditions, or if you're 65 or older. Don't pause a moment longer. Ask your doctor or pharmacist about getting vaccinated against pneumococcal pneumonia today.
Have you heard? Sling TV offers the news you love for less. Wait, you look and sound just like me. Actually, I am you. Because I'm the same news programs on Sling for less. You mean you're me, but for less money? A lot less. I'm all your favorite news programs and more on Sling, starting at just $40 a month. Everything great about me, but for less money, which makes me greater, don't you think? It's the same news for less, starting at $40 a month.
Sling. This is your season to smile with new dentures from Aspen Dental. To raise a toast and gather together. To wrap up the fun and round up the gang. To help get you ready, your Aspen Dental Denture team is celebrating 25 years of affordable care with an epic anniversary savings event. Don't miss enjoying a moment with fast repairs in our on-site labs and 20% off your custom dentures. Plus, we have a denture money-back guarantee, so you can smile with confidence. Aspen Dental. Book today.
Well, news of tonight's Colorado Supreme Court ruling broke. It did more than just make history. It also lent credence to a legal argument that crosses partisan lines in some highly respected circles. My next guest, a conservative, along with the distinguished liberal constitutional scholar Lawrence Tribe, were among the first to advocate for removing Donald Trump from the ballot on 14th Amendment grounds. Joining us now, retired federal appeals court Judge J. Michael Ludig. Judge, thank you for coming on. What is your reaction to this ruling from the Colorado Supreme Court?
Thank you for having me on tonight, Pam. The individual justices of the Colorado Supreme Court brought honor to their court and as well to the state and federal judiciaries with their opinion tonight in this historic case. The court meticulously and methodically addressed seriatim the many state issues and federal constitutional issues that were involved in the case. They marshaled the support for each and every one of their decisions of state law and federal constitutional law, as well as any judge could do. Their opinion is unassailable. Under the objective law of the federal Constitution and Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, the Supreme Court of the United States ought to affirm this decision today.
So you call it unassailable, but there were 3 judges on this court that dissented from this decision. There are 3 other states that didn't agree with this decision. Some of the sticking points have been the fact that Section 3 of the 14th Amendment doesn't explicitly say office of the presidency, that there was no due process to establish that Trump incited the insurrection, and there's a question of whether this is allowed under state law. What do you say to those arguments that work against the ruling tonight from Colorado Supreme Court?
Well, Pam, the first thing I would say is that there has never been a court to rule on this issue. The Colorado Supreme Court is the first court, appellate court in any state to rule on the applicability of Section 3 to the former president. The other cases that have been decided on state law grounds and or jurisdictional grounds. So this case stands alone. I call it unassailable because, as you noted, the preeminent constitutional scholar of our time, Professor Lawrence Tribe, and I have been studying this for 3 years now. In the wake of January 6th, Professor Tribe has been studying Section 3 of the 14th Amendment literally for his entire career. So when we say, and I'm speaking for Professor Tribe tonight, who I spoke to earlier, that the opinion is unassailable, that means that he and I have taken into account every single argument contrary to every point made by the court today, including all of the contrary evidence to the opinion tonight, and it is unassailable. The court ruled that, and I'll address your other questions in this answer, the court ruled that a president of the United States holds the office of the president, and therefore, under Section 3, the presidency is an office under the United States. The court next held that the president is an officer of the United States. And finally, on the applicability of the 14th Amendment, the court held that the oath that the president takes, which is different from the oath that other officers of the United States take, is nonetheless an oath to support the Constitution of the United States within the meaning of the 14th Amendment. And then, of course, the court went on to affirm the lower court decision that the former president had in fact engaged in an insurrection or rebellion against the Constitution of the United States in all of his conduct leading up to January 6th and thereafter. Though your earlier guest, I think, said that that's a factual determination. It's not just a factual, it's a mixed question of fact and law. The judges here and the Supreme Court will have to decide what the meaning of an insurrection or rebellion is for purposes of the 14th Amendment. And
Right.
that's what the Supreme Court of Colorado did today. And its reasoning and its support for that conclusion is also unassailable.
Well, we will see what the Supreme Court thinks of this, assuming Trump appeals as he says he will, and that they take up this case. Judge Ludig, thank you for coming on and sharing your perspective on this very important case tonight. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Pam.
And for more on the political impact, we're joined now by pollster and communication strategist Frank Luntz, who has been getting the pulse of Trump voters for years. So the obvious first question, Frank, what do you think the impact of this ruling will be on their support for him?
It's going to be exactly what the indictments did. It's going to be exactly what the criticisms have done. Donald Trump thrives on negativity. He thrives on legal systems that try to hold him accountable. And I'm convinced that his polling numbers are going to go up. Just today, the New York Times published 6 key swing states and had Donald Trump up beyond the margin of error in 5 out of the 6. The polling earlier a month ago was significant. Trump is gaining. The more that he is prosecuted, the more that he is condemned, the higher his numbers go as people rally around him. And I would say to the judges, as I said to the Justice Department, you're actually making it more likely that Donald Trump is elected next November by how you are pursuing this. You don't explain the decisions. You don't put things in context. And so Trump climbs and climbs and climbs. And right now, he's beating Joe Biden clearly nationwide.
Well, for the judges would say, look, we're just going by the law without fear of favor. And I mean, but does the context even matter to Trump supporters? Because there have been, tonight's ruling was really lengthy, explaining point by point why they believe he incited the insurrection, why the 14th Amendment applies to him. But to the average Trump supporter, does that context even matter? Is this more about, once again, Trump is the victim of the deep state kind of thinking?
It actually proves Trump's point. It proves that the people in charge, the people in power, are trying to take him down. But you're not trying to reach all the Trump voters. You're simply trying to reach 3 or 4% of them that will make a difference in this election. Now, make no mistake, there's very few undecided voters right now. There are very few people going back and forth between Trump and Biden. It's more about those people are trying to decide whether or not to vote. And I got to tell you, Nikki Haley was gaining and gaining and gaining every single day. But she's going to be lost in the coverage for the next few days, maybe for the next couple of weeks. As Trump turns this to his advantage, he is the best victim politician I have ever seen in my 35 years in doing this. And this is exactly what he would have wanted in the run-up to the Iowa caucus.
Very quickly, because it stuck out to me in looking at these polls, how many people who sat out in 2020 are now saying they're going to vote and they're going to vote for Trump. So you think this just sort of supercharges that, right? It's going to just bring more people out to vote for him who maybe sat out before.
And the state that blew me away was Nevada, because that's a state with a significant percentage of Latino votes. Trump has been screaming about illegal immigration, and Nevada seems to be rewarding him for the language that he uses and for the intensity of his message. If Nevada's going this much for Trump, that ought to send you a big signal about what's happening in America today.
All right, Frank Luntz, thank you so much. Up next, a 360 investigation, how the first bill Ron DeSantis signed into law as Florida governor legalizing smokable medical marijuana in the state raises questions about his own record on catering to campaign donors and special interests. And then later, a status report on the erupting volcano in Iceland and who it threatens.